not really enjoyable. I mean, it's not pure Formula One. If anything, I could tell you it's probably like Formula E on steroids.
This could be more real than ever. What if the greatest driver on the planet is sitting in the worst car of his career and he knows it? Not a backmarker, not a midfield team trying to punch above its weight. The same team that won 4 consecutive Constructors Championships, the same garage where Verstappen was basically untouchable for 3 years straight. Gone. All of it. And here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. Max Verstappen might not just leave Red Bull. He might leave Formula One entirely. This story is way more complicated and way more fascinating than the headlines are letting on. Let's go back to before the 2026 season even started, because the root of everything happening right now traces back to one of the most radical rule changes in Formula One history. The 2026 technical regulations, years in the making, introduced a mandatory 50-50 power split between the internal combustion engine and the electrical motor generator unit. On paper, that sounds like progress, greener, more sustainable, Formula One moving with the times. In practice, it created something that nobody fully anticipated. When a car is running at full speed down a long straight, the electric component depletes fast, and when it runs out, the system cuts power automatically. The car doesn't slow down gradually, it clips, like hitting an invisible wall of reduced thrust while you're doing 300 kilometers per hour. Drivers started calling it the cliff, engineers started losing sleep over it, and Max Verstappen, he had a name for the whole package: Formula E on steroids.
And that's been our target, trying to really understand this new formula, trying to understand the engine and the car, making sure that things are reliable, that's an ongoing process.
That wasn't a throwaway comment. Verstappen is famously blunt, but he's also calculated. When he says something that's seismic publicly, it's because he wants people to hear it. He's not frustrated. He's communicating a verdict. The new formula essentially transformed driving from an art form into software management. Every lap is now a negotiation between the driver and an energy deployment system. The car decides when you get full power. The car decides when it clips. And the driver, even the best driver in the world, is at least partially a passenger. For someone who grew up karting, who built his identity around the physical act of driving, who has said in interviews that he wants to feel the car talk to him through the steering wheel, this isn't just inconvenient, it's an existential crisis. But here's the thing, all teams are dealing with the same regulations. The clipping affects everyone. So why is Verstappen's situation so much worse? That's where it gets really interesting. For the first decade of Red Bull's dominance, they had Renault power. Then Honda came in, and that partnership produced one of the most successful engine team marriages since Ferrari and Schumacher. The 2021-2024 period was basically a highlight reel. Then Honda stepped back. Red Bull, rather than finding another engine partner, decided to do something breathtakingly ambitious, build their own power unit from scratch, with Ford as a technical collaborator. Let me be honest about how enormous that task is. Engine development in Formula One takes years, requires hundreds of engineers, and even established manufacturers. Mercedes, Ferrari, Renault have struggled with major regulations changes before. Red Bull's engine division, Red Bull Powertrains, was essentially a startup trying to pass its final exam on the first day of school. And the verdict from the track is not kind. In Australia, Isaac Hadjar, the other Red Bull driver, had his car fail mid-race. Not a bad result, not a spin, a mechanical failure on a car that was supposed to represent the new chapter of this team. Then came China, and things got genuinely alarming. Sprint qualifying. Max Verstappen, 4-time world champion, arguably the most naturally talented F1 driver of his generation, qualified 8th, not 1st, not 3rd, 8th. The gap to pole? 1.7 seconds behind George Russell in sprint qualifying, which is shorter and less impactful than a full session. That gap is not a bad day, that gap is a structural problem. Verstappen's own words after, the car was undriveable.
A disaster, I would say.
Meanwhile, across the paddock, Mercedes looked like they'd arrived from a different sport entirely. Russell, Hamilton, wait, Hamilton is at Ferrari now. That's another story. But the Silver Arrows found something in these regulations that other teams are still searching for. Their energy deployment is seamless, their clipping is minimal, their downforce balance works. When a regulation change this dramatic hits, there are always winners and losers. In 2026, Red Bull is not in the first group. Here's the part of this story that doesn't get enough attention because it's harder to see in a lap time comparison. Dietrich Mateschitz, the man who invented Red Bull racing as we know it, who turned an energy drink into a motorsport empire, died in October 2022. And when a visionary founder leaves, they take something with them that can't be replaced by a new org chart. Then Christian Horner, the principal who built the modern team's culture, who navigated the technical genius of Adrian Newey and the volatile talent of multiple world champions, was shown the door, under circumstances that were, let's say, not entirely straightforward. Adrian Newey himself? He'd already walked. Off to Aston Martin, where he'll have a fresh canvas and the kind of respect that apparently stopped coming his way in Milton Keynes, and with those departures, the engineering staff started bleeding. Not one or two people. Dozens of key technical personnel who built the RB18, the RB19, the cars that made Verstappen look like a video game character set to easy mode. Laurent Mekies, the new team principal, is not a bad choice. He came from Ferrari, he knows the pressure of a top team, he's intelligent and measured, but he walked into a position where he's essentially rebuilding an F1 team mid-season, while competing against teams with stable structures and superior power units. That's not a project, that's a rescue mission. And when you combine a compromised engine, a destabilized team structure, and regulations that seem custom-built to punish any weaknesses in your deployment software, you get what we're seeing right now. A champion strapped into a car that isn't answering him back. Now here's where the story shifts from motorsport drama to something that could genuinely reshape Formula One's future. Verstappen's contract with Red Bull has exit clauses, specific, documented performance-based triggers that allow him to walk before the deal expires. One of those triggers, if he's not realistically competing for the championship, inside the top 3 or 4 in the standings by the summer break, the door opens. We're still early in the 2026 season, but the trajectory is not pointing up, it's pointing sideways, with the occasional dip. And Mercedes, they've been smart about this. Toto Wolff hasn't been subtle. A seat exists, the car is quick. The regulations suit the Silver Arrows right now in a way that feels like they wrote the rulebook themselves. For Verstappen to arrive at Mercedes in 2027 wouldn't just be a driver change, it would be a coronation. He'd be walking into the best car, with the best engine, in a formula he might actually enjoy driving. Aston Martin was another name circling. Newey is there, which matters to Verstappen. That relationship produced some of the most dominant machinery in the sport's history. But Aston's 2026 start has been underwhelming. Newey needs time, and Verstappen right now doesn't seem like he has patience to wait for another project to come good. So, Mercedes 2027, it's not confirmed, but if you were betting, the odds have never been shorter. Let me take you to Albert Park for a second, because the Australian Grand Prix gave us some important information about where Red Bull actually stand. Verstappen managed to extract a competitive result that tells you something about the driver. Even in a car that's fighting him on every straight, he's finding margins. His racecraft, his tire management, his ability to read the pace of those around him, it remains elite. If you squint, you can almost pretend things are fine. But you can't squint at Hadjar's retirement. Mechanical failures in the first race of a season with a brand new power unit don't just affect the result, they affect confidence, they affect the engineers. They send a message to the rest of the paddock that the reliability question isn't theoretical, and Verstappen knows that winning a championship requires more than speed on some laps. You need to finish races. You need a car that doesn't retire you when the stakes are highest. Australia was, in many ways, a warning. For this weekend in China, here's the honest picture. The Shanghai circuit's layout will not be kind to Red Bull's current weaknesses. Long straights mean more clipping exposure. The DRS zones amplify the power unit gap. Mercedes, with their superior energy management, will likely be able to deploy cleanly where Red Bull will be cutting thrust. Verstappen will squeeze every 10th out of the package. He always does. But predicting a podium in China right now requires a significant leap of faith or some unexpected disruption at the front. Realistically, if Red Bull can bring some updates and if the clipping management improves even marginally, P4 to P6 might be the ceiling. A podium would feel like an overachievement at this stage of the season. And that gap to Russell? Expected to narrow slightly in race trim. Verstappen is exceptional at conserving tires and reading degradation, but the underlying pace deficit won't disappear in one weekend. Here's what I want you to sit with, because this is the part that actually keeps Formula 1 insiders awake at night. Verstappen hasn't just been dropping hints about changing teams, he's been dropping hints about changing sports. He's confirmed participation in races at the Nürburgring, at Spa, at Le Mans, endurance racing, GT racing, the kind of events where the car obeys you, where the lap feels like driving, where there's no software rationing your joy of it. He said more than once that he doesn't want to wait until he's 40 to go enjoy motorsport in its purest form. He's 31 right now. Think about that framing for a second. He's not talking about taking a sabbatical. He's not threatening to retire as a negotiating tactic. He's describing a parallel world where Formula 1 has already disappointed him enough that he's begun building the exit. The greatest driver of his generation, potentially the greatest of all time, depending on how you weight championships against competition level, could leave this sport not with a trophy in his hand but with a shrug, because the formula stopped feeling like driving and started feeling like an algorithm. That would be a catastrophic loss for F1. Not just for Red Bull, not just for Verstappen's legacy, for the sport's identity. And the wild, uncomfortable truth is this: nobody's coming to save it. Not in 2026. Red Bull's engine won't close the gap to Mercedes overnight. The regulations aren't changing mid-season, and Verstappen's tolerance is finite. The empire isn't just cracking. It's asking a very serious question about whether it wants to be rebuilt at all. Subscribe if you want to follow this story as it develops, because I have a feeling the most dramatic chapters are still ahead.